As one of the countries most severely affected by extreme weather events, Vietnam has actively implemented international commitments and made efforts to respond to climate change. In line with signing Paris Agreement, Vietnam has issued a plan for the implementation of this agreement with a focus on the national determined contribution. Vietnam has pledged to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 8% by 2030 and is able to increase the number to 25% if it receives effective support from the international community. In order to concretize solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, countries often combine making and developing carbon dioxide reduction policies with promoting research and applying technological solutions. Greenhouse gas emission reduction policies vary widely and are different from country to country. In Vietnam, a number of programs have been implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as the National Green Growth Strategy, cleaner manufacturing, energy saving, and dealing with facilities which causes environmental pollutions. In addition, Vietnam has many policies to promote the production and use of clean energy and renewable energy such as wind power, solar power, biomass electricity development. Hello and welcome back to Sharing Vietnam. In the high-level dialogue on climate change took place in Hanoi recently, United Nations Development Programme announced a study on key drivers contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission in Vietnam. And now Ms. Wiesen, resident representative of UNDP in Vietnam, will have a talk with us about this study. Hello and thank you for joining our show. So what is the main purpose of this high-level dialogue on climate change?
Thank you so much for that question. And I think the big purpose of this meeting today in high-level dialogue is to review the implications of the new IPCC report that's come out on 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming. We've already experienced what 1% centigrade degree warming has caused. We've seen much more extreme weather events, we've seen much more extreme floods, droughts, and if we 1.5%, even a higher increase, will create more calamities. However, it's much better than a 2% degree of warming. And what the report shows that 2% is which had been agreed earlier, has dramatic impacts, and that if we were to take action to ensure we limit the global warming to 1.5 degree, we could make enormous savings of lives, enormous savings of pollution, and it could have enormous benefits. And I think the main point the report makes is that it's far better, the cost of inaction far outweighs the cost of action. And we really have some good solutions that are available now to limit to 1.5 degrees of warming. But to do so will require enormous efforts, enormous investment, but the message is it's doable, it can be done, and it would make a significant difference to clean growth, clean green growth, to the lives of people, to the health of people, and to the sustainability of the planet.
And according to the report, what is the assessment on Vietnam's effort to respond to climate change and to implement the Paris Agreement on climate change so far?
So Vietnam has taken impressive measures already, and they're already starting to prepare their plans for NDCs, and they're actually looking at revising them right now in preparation for a review in 2019. And these are great efforts, and Vietnam is to really be commended for them. I think the message that comes from this report on 1.5 degrees centigrade is that those efforts we'll need to raise the ambition of those efforts. And the good news is that Vietnam has an enormous potential. It has tremendous renewable energy potential, whether it's solar voltaic, whether it's wind, and there are great alternatives to coal-fired plants and that make very good alternative energy uses that are now economical. It would, however, take some changes in the pricing, the structure, and some enabling policy to make it happen. And that's where a big effort will need to be made.
And I learned that UNDP has conducted an independent study on key drivers contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Vietnam. So could you please share with us about these elements?
So the study looks at what are some of the key drivers for greenhouse gas emissions. And there are two ways. One is energy consumption and the other is energy production. So those are very important. And energy production and how it's produced is very energy intensive right now. And there are ways that we can create and make it far more efficient, and there are ways to crowd in renewable energy so that it's cleaner and greener and still competitive in terms of pricing. Then there's actually the use, and that's the consumption of energy, and that we need to be far more careful in how it is that we consume the energy that we do in a far more conscious way. Very interesting in what we find in these reports, there's quite a bit of interest from private sector investment. In fact, there are enormous investments that are waiting to be made in the renewable energy sector in Vietnam.
The period from 2018 to 2020 is crucial before Vietnam enters the period of commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the high-level dialogue on climate change organized by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, the United Nations Development Programme, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is an important activity with issues related to global greenhouse gas emissions.
Việc IPCC lựa chọn Việt Nam để công bố báo cáo đặc biệt của IPCC về tác động của việc ấm lên toàn cầu 1,5 độ C là một sự kiện quan trọng giúp chúng ta hiểu hơn về tác động của biến đổi khí hậu để tìm ra các giải pháp thích ứng và tiếp tục phát triển bền vững đất nước.
At the conference, the special report of the IPCC, referred to as the 1.5 degrees Celsius report, was shared. The important findings of this report show that in order to curb global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, global greenhouse gas emission by 2030 need to be reduced by 45% comparing to those in 2010 and must reach net zero by 2050.
The climate change impacts and how we respond to them are closely linked to sustainable development and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, this is one of the key findings of this special report. As part of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a mix of measures to adapt to climate change and options to reduce emissions will have benefits for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals.
So far, countries have made positive progress towards implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change. However, the commitments made by governments are not enough to curb the global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thus, the greenhouse gas reduction pathway in Vietnam will require profound, rapid, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society.
It will be most effective when local and regional governments and decision makers are supported by national governments. Strengthening the capacities of national and subnational authorities, civil society, the private sector, indigenous peoples and local communities can support the ambitious actions that will be required to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Thì tôi hy vọng là các nước ngoài bao gồm cả Việt Nam sẽ đưa ra những cam kết mạnh mẽ hơn để cắt giảm khí CO2, chúng ta gọi là khí nhà kính, để có thể đạt được cái cam kết 1,5 độ C. Và theo tôi thì Việt Nam hoàn toàn có thể đóng góp được tốt hơn trong cái vấn đề cam kết về giảm phát thải khí nhà kính.
It is expected that in 2019, Vietnam will complete the NDC review to submit to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. And in the current context of Vietnam, what are the difficulties in promoting these key drivers?
I think the major issue, or one of the major issues, is what we call an enabling environment. Having the legal and the regulatory environment that's attractive for private investment to come in. There's no lack of interest from the private sector, and there's no lack of alternative energy sources, and there's no lack of competitive pricing. So I think all these elements are there. However, there is the pricing for coal-fired energy is still largely subsidized. So that creates an incentive for people to continue to use it because it's cheaper. So I think there's, if we can start to look at gradually creating taking out these kinds of subsidies would have an enormous impact and have a more equitable pricing that reflects the real cost. So when we say real cost of coal, that means not just burning coal, how much you invest, but also the health and environmental impact that may take a long time for cleaning up. So I think some of the challenges that Vietnam faces, as many other countries do as well, is finding the incentive scheme to shift to renewable.
Then what are UNDP's recommendations for Vietnam to tackle those challenges? Promote key drivers to the greenhouse gas emission reduction pathway.
And I think that will take some look at the pricing structure, and then also looking at the private sector and the key critical role that they can play, and to make it easier for them to engage and invest in renewables. And that would have a significant impact on the shape and the future of energy consumption and production here in Vietnam. So the study shows some of the opportunities that are here. It also highlights some of the best practices that are in Vietnam right now, and some of the innovative ways that these issues are being tackled. It points to the need for greater ambition to reach the 1.5 degree warming target and actions that could be taken. And it also shows the economic balance sheet, that it is doable financially, it is doable technically, but it will require creating an enabling policy environment for that to happen. And that will take a concerted effort. The key message is the time is short. The time is very short, and the window of opportunity is closing. But if action taken today will make a significant difference in the lives of the people of Vietnam and to the economy of Vietnam. And there's the opportunity, the great opportunity is for Vietnam to become a leader in green, clean growth and really lead the way for the future.
Then how will the implementation of greenhouse gas emission reduction help Vietnam in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals?
They're absolutely completely linked, the two of them. So the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are complementary. And the key message is that achieving these goals for Paris will help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for Vietnam and also the world. So actions that we're taking today affect us within our own boundaries, but they also affect the whole planet that we live on. So I think it's the future of people, planet, and prosperity embedded in the 2030 agenda, and the targets and goals are essential. And looking at how to achieve energy efficiency and energy production, energy savings, and shifting to renewables will go in a long, long way to achieving those core sustainable development priorities embedded in the 2030 agenda.
Again, thank you so much for your time with us.
It's always a delight to meet with you, and it's wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much for inviting UNDP to this interview.
And that's all for Sharing Vietnam today. Thank you for watching. See you next time.